Hi everybody. I typically don't do videos like this, but I wanted to try something new today. I just got back from seeing the new Uncharted movie, and I thought that it was actually pretty good compared to what I thought it was going to be like. This movie got announced, several years ago, and I'm pretty in tune with what's going on with PlayStation, and this was kind of supposed to be their first start to the whole movie division. And getting back from the movie, I thought it's a pretty good starting point if they're gonna keep doing movies. It's especially surprising how good it is considering that it's a video game movie, and a lot of those are typically pretty bad. So let's get into it. What about this movie makes it good? Well, let's talk about Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, because when I saw that he was announced to play Nathan Drake, I just couldn't believe it, and so couldn't plenty of other people on the internet. And then eventually we find out that Mark Wahlberg is playing Victor Sullivan, and that even furthers people's confusion. And getting back from the movie, I still would agree that they are not the perfect match for who should have played those roles. But by the end of it, with everything I had seen and their performances, I thought actually this was pretty acceptable. When I was seeing a lot of the commercials and the previews for this film, they kind of solidified the fact that I thought I wasn't going to like this. I kind of thought it was going to dance over what made Uncharted special, kind of just cherry pick the good stuff and have nothing original to it. But this movie actually had a lot of originality to it, which was great. At first I thought maybe they weren't gonna do like a reboot, but we're gonna kind of take the film and the whole story in its own kind of direction, maybe change a few things here and there. And from my understanding, I don't think that they did. I think this movie is feasibly canon and makes sense in the lore. Now, I wanted to do a spoiler part and a non-spoiler part, so to talk about the non-spoilers, by the time the movie was done, I was extremely happy with it. I thought that Tom Holland of Spider-Man fame actually played a really good Nathan Drake. And I thought that Mark Wahlberg played a really good Sully. Why? I think a lot of it came down to really good writing. The movie felt like it was written by the writers of the games. It really did, with all the, they kept some of the witty humor for like the previews and the commercials, but that was barely even touching the surface. There was actually a surprising amount of little funny moments that just came out of things that Drake said or that Drake did. And I think a lot of the things too that really sold me on Tom Holland as Nathan Drake was he doesn't have the physique of Nathan Drake, but when he's in the outfits and when they have the camera just on his face and he's got that stoic face going, you can buy it as him being Nathan Drake. The only times when I don't buy it is when he's standing alongside Sully and having played the games and know them very well. You can see that when they're standing next to each other, Tom Holland looks more like Nathan Drake than Mark Wahlberg does as Sully, but you can still kind of suspend some disbelief and say that, okay, these are the guys. And I really wish they would have picked other people, but from my understanding, Sony picked Tom Holland because he's popular, and they knew that starring a more popular, younger actor in the role of Nathan Drake would likely do them a lot of good, and I certainly think that it did. I pulled up a number here of how much money this movie's made, and just a simple Google search says $226.4 million, and it says that the long in development adventure film about lost treasure cost $120 million to make, so they've about double made their money back, and I'm happy that they did. Now, to actually get into like the plot without getting too spoilery yet, it's basically an Uncharted adventure. They have a treasure, this Spanish treasure, somewhat connected to the interest of the Drakes. And there's another family that kind of has like their sight on this treasure, and that's basically the conflict. Is, you know, he's going on this adventure to find this treasure like any other Uncharted. And from my understanding, this movie takes place before the first Uncharted, and I really liked a lot of... See, they didn't rely too much on taking moments from the games and just putting them in this movie. They did a much better job than I thought they would on actually making Drake a character that you can like right from the screen. Like, you actually like what he's doing, you know. I wish that they could have different voices, though. That was my major gripe, I guess, was he doesn't have the voice, Tom Holland. And really, neither does Mark Wahlberg as Sully. Like, you can see that they're trying. Like, the way that they say things is very much in character, and I know that this is supposed to be a younger version of these characters, especially Sully. And, it just wasn't working, you know. Like, you can suspend your disbelief long enough to say, okay, these are the characters, these are the films, but no, just Tom Holland does not sound like Nolan North. He's much higher pitched, and it broke a lot of the immersion for me, but then again, it was still a great film. Set pieces. This movie, another thing I really liked about this movie was it did not overstay its welcome. It wrapped up very cleanly and very nicely. It didn't want you to open your head up to the idea that there would be sequels. They weren't doing that because it's a movie based within a property already. And they had to somehow come up with a way of telling a story in that universe that didn't break anything else within that universe, and they somehow did. Like the set pieces, if you've seen the commercials, it's no spoiler that there's a set piece that's modeled after the plane. And, you know, that was, you know, action set pieces are always cool. It was definitely one of the better parts of the movie. There was a lot of small stuff with the way that Nate would speak to Sully or some of the other characters that really sold me. And like I said, I think it's actually more of the writing than it is Tom Holland or Mark Wahlberg just playing their characters. Would I like to see them play these characters again? I actually really would. And I think, given this movie's success, I certainly think that we will see another movie like this. Gosh, what else can I say without getting into the spoilers? You know what? Let's just jump right into them. To summarize the plot to the best of my extent, the movie surprisingly starts off with young Nate and young Sam, and I was extremely happy to see that, because they weren't saying, oh, we just want this part of the story. They were saying, okay, let's take the entirety of Nate's story that we kind of got an idea of what it's like from all 4 of the mainline Uncharted games. And they did it, you know, they jumped around a little bit from like the past to the present, but it was really good. You even get to see Nate's brother Sam, which was, he's not in the whole film, he's only in the beginning, but he gives the motivation to the character of Nate, which you can actually really believe. You know, he wants this treasure, his brother's gone, he wants this treasure really badly. The family dynamic between Nate and Sullivan, I thought, was really good. Like, they're abrasive towards each other, but you also know that there's kind of like a father-son, a trainee kind of mentee situation going on. And I really liked that Drake, Tom Holland, got the chance to be testy a lot in this movie. Like, it wasn't just him saying goofy things or just him saying cool things. No, they actually took the character of Drake in this point in time in the story and they fleshed him out. I would say, you know, this movie is definitely a movie. You couldn't take this movie and turn it into an Uncharted project, but it stands alongside the games in a way that I didn't think that it would. I think some of the puzzle stuff was pretty cool. Like, they don't take any direct inspirations of any of the puzzles from the games, but you know, they have these 2 keys kind of at the beginning of the movie, which leads them to you know, Nate and Sullivan are trying to get their hand on one of these keys, which is at this auction house, which is directly an inspiration from, well, I shouldn't say inspiration, but directly an homage to Uncharted 4 and that auction house scene, which is an awesome scene. So I'm glad that they were kind of able to do that again. And that's the scene where you can kind of see Nate swinging around on those neon fluorescent thin lights. Good scene, really good combat there. They make it seem like Drake is young, which is really cool. You know, he's not beating everybody up. He's still like growing up. He's learning. You can tell that he's not the Drake that you see even in Uncharted 1, but he's still Drake, which I really enjoy. Spoiler alert, since we're at the spoiler section, is a character that appears in this movie that I wasn't expecting, that I really liked, was the character of Chloe Fraser from Uncharted 2, 3, and Lost Legacy. And I just wanted to pull up what her name here was, just to give the credit where it's due. Yeah, she was in the movie. I was extremely surprised. So it basically gives credence that she was there earlier in the story than we ever would have thought. And what I really liked as a viewer, as someone actually going to see this film, as someone who plays the games, is it wasn't the kind of dynamic where these characters meet and you already know how they act. They were acting in such a way where I'm like, oh, have you met each other? Okay, maybe you have. And it was just really cool. I'm looking for... Yeah, her name is Sophia Ali. And I'm looking at pictures of her in the movie right now. And from the second that she walked on screen, before she even said a line, I knew who the character was, and I was so happy that they were there. And it did lead initially for me to some confusion of, was this, like I said, a reboot? Were they taking this, not a reboot, but were they taking this in a different direction because it was a movie? But no, I think it takes place before the first Uncharted game, and apparently she was there. Apparently she was already working with Sullivan, which is just some really cool lore building there. You know, you get to see Nate's iconic ring throughout the whole film. He's always wearing his hair in the iconic way. He's always got that stoic look. And then you take, like, I feel like Sully wasn't quite as Sully as I would have liked him to be, the way that he is in the later games, but I guess it kind of makes sense if he's younger. To further the plot a little bit, basically, Nate and Chloe and Sully, well, Chloe mostly, they're kind of like begrudgingly working together at first to get to this gold that was part of this, basically it's the treasure, right? And they go to the church in Barcelona, and they go through the church, and they're solving all kinds of Uncharted puzzles, which basically consists of Tom Holland opening up his journal, saying a bunch of smart stuff, the characters nodding their head and talking along, and them pointing where they gotta go, and then going there. And then when they get there, there's like some half trap where they don't do it right on the first time, and then they get to it, and it's pretty fun to watch that stuff happen. I was always waiting, like, to see, like, what were they gonna present with me, like, what little touches, and they kept doing it. They do a really good job of making young Drake still seem heroic while still seeming like a little not as heroic, which I thought was kind of neat. Like, they give him obvious room to grow while still kind of giving him room to flesh out. Like, I think a problem that a lot of people say with movies is that they just don't give enough room for characters to grow. And this film doesn't really suffer from that problem because you know more about the characters already if you've played the game. But to really get into this conversation, you have to ask, well, what about all the viewers that don't play the games that went to saw this movie? Now, I was looking around in the theater. I went and saw this on a Wednesday late, and there was not that many people in there. They looked older, and no idea if they've seen the games or whatever. But it's like, I'm glad that they were able to take, like, okay, what is identifiably Uncharted? And they're like, okay, this action sequence, this outfit, this behavior. And they were able to say, okay, well, let's take those things, let's give it our own little spin on it, and then put that into the movie so that it's still original enough so that, you know, if they would have done this Uncharted movie and played it extremely safe and everything consisted of just the same old stuff, I do not think this movie would be good. But it does its own unique stuff. To get a little further in the movie, basically at Barcelona, these keys lead them through a bunch of different corridors and kind of mini puzzles. One's like a water trap of sort where they need Sullivan's help on the surface. And eventually they get to this room with these cool, like, urns. The urns break and them in salt, and behind all the salt is like a map that's familiar to Nate that kind of leads them to the next step. You know, there's all kinds of, like, little things in between that kind of drive the story forward, but there's that. To talk about the villains, you know, they weren't going to hype up like a mega villain. It was just kind of be something that comes and goes, but they were actually able to still keep things interesting. Like, I shouldn't say that there's twists and turns, but there's little twists here and there, little diversions from the plot. You have this main bad guy called Moncada. Let me see here. Yeah, Moncado. He's kind of the family, a person in this family who owns this gold, or his bloodline owns this gold, and that's kind of why he has motivation to get this treasure. But along the way, he hires this woman named Braddock. I wish I had her full name here. Honestly, those were probably the most forgettable people in the movie were the villains, because you're like, oh, I already know these characters. Of course, you know that you're going to see them again if you've played the games, but with these villains, it's like you knew they were disposable. Like, you're going into the movie, eating your popcorn, drinking your drink. It's still a popcorn flick. Like, you know what's going to happen. Nate's going to win. They're going to sail away with the gold and all that stuff. But we're not there yet. This Braddock character very much reminded me of Nadine from Uncharted 4, so much so that I wouldn't be surprised if other people questioned, was that Nadine, just from seeing the movie, but it isn't. They don't say names too much in this movie. It kind of, you have to really be paying attention, I guess, but you don't have to be paying attention too hard if you have already played the games. But she's pretty cool. This movie does action scenes really good. So there's like hand-to-hand combat scenes, a lot even involving Mark Wahlberg, which was really cool to see, because you get to see Sully fight in the games, but you don't really get to see him like fight, and it was cool to see that in this movie. So you get some fight scenes between Sully and Braddock. The Mankato villain actually ends up not being like the main villain. She ends up being the main villain. Don't need to get too spoilery, but you know, he ends up just kind of, you know, he's out of the story, and here she is, and she's also after this gold, and because it's like any story, you know that they have henchmen, so of course she's got people that she points, and then they go and they beat up Nate. It's kind of funny to see that stuff. I really liked that this movie, like, Nate is kind of like a Casanova, but he doesn't overplay himself. There's not like an overabundance of like romance or anything like that. There's none of that. You just have Nate's typical heroic nature. To further that, so you get Chloe Fraser in this movie, but you don't get anybody like Elena, because she, of course, is not introduced even into the story yet until Uncharted 1. So if they do another movie and they set it in the future, like maybe in between some of the later Uncharted games, they could do something cool like that and include Elena. I think that would be a really cool addition to the cast. Now that's another thing where it's like, if I saw Tom Holland standing as Nathan Drake, standing alongside whoever they're gonna have to play as Elena, like, you have to suspend the disbelief. But once you're in the movie and you start hearing them talk and the plot is developing, you're like, okay, you know, you can almost act as if the games don't exist and this is just its own thing, and it's pretty good. You know, the movie has like little problems where maybe they're fighting a bad guy or they're solving a puzzle, and just for the sake of saving minutes for the movie, they just trim out little parts here and there, and I thought that was okay, but, you know, sometimes I could see a viewer going like, oh, that was too easy or whatever. But it's a video game, you know, they're fighting, but they're also shooting like plenty of guns, and it's like, if you took one bullet, you're done. But it's Uncharted, so people are pew-pewing all the way. Now, I'm not an expert for CGI or anything like that, but as you get later into the film and they have the plane sequence, when the scene is happening, when everything is falling out of the cargo plane, I thought the visuals were just like amazing. I thought the camera work, the cinematography was really good, just the way that they would pan and cut away. It feels like, in the way that they actually directed the movie, that they took inspiration from the games, at least in a couple ways. It really helps being Uncharted and then translating that to an action movie, because you've got no shortage of action. You can always have an excuse for action, like, oh, the bad guys arrived, just fight or whatever. But later in the film, they are able to track the treasure more closely to the East Indies, something like that. Very pretty place. And eventually they find the treasure, which is on these 2 ships. And this is pretty much the final, I would say the main final sequence of the movie. You know, when you're watching this part of the movie, you're like, wow, this is the best part. But then, like, by the time it's over, it's like, it's over. The movie's over. Which I guess I was happy with, but blah, blah, blah. Anyways, you've got these 2 ships. Maybe you saw this in the promo, but Braddock and her team actually end up airlifting the 2 ships out of the cove, out of whatever kind of cave area that they were in. And you've got basically what feels like 30 plus minutes of the movie just consisting of the action scenes happening on these boats as they're flying, hanging from these helicopters. And what was cool watching this movie was that was actually like the most unique part of the movie, was that whole sequence. And it made you feel like you actually wanted to like be there. It made you feel like you wanted to put your hands on it, right? Like, it felt like it deserved to be in that universe. It felt like it was right there alongside all the other ones. I'm like, I wish, it's like, why didn't they think of that, right? When they were doing the games. It looks so cool. The 2 ships swing back and forth as they're like breaking apart. You know, their goal is to get the gold on these ships, but at the same time they're trying to save their asses. I guess that's another thing, is it's like Sully has the motivation for the gold and Nate has the motivation for the gold, but he's also got motivation on top of that with his like brother. His brother is a motivation in the film, but aside from the early flashbacks, he's not really there. No, not really. But of course they beat the bad guys slowly. They hijack one of the ships. One of the other ships just crashes into a rock and explodes into a million pieces. And there's kind of a final action sequence between Nate and Braddock on this ship as Sullivan's flying it away. Chloe at this point, like, because she's like kind of in Uncharted 2, she's like somewhat of a double agent. Nate had led her along and gave her the wrong coordinates to where they were going, so she wasn't really a part of this part. And of course Nate wins. The ship is too heavy for the helicopter, whatever machine it was. Not really a helicopter, more like a huge ass helicopter, but a lifter. But the ship falls back into the ocean. It sails for a second. It's really cool, and then it's gone. And the Braddock lady, I guess, is presumably killed along with it. And there's some few, more congratulatory. My God, there's a few more happy sequences at the end of the movie when they're in the helicopter between Nate and Sullivan, and it made me feel really good as a fan, because I'm like, wow, there was actually emotional payoff by the end of the movie. Like, you felt like your time was respected. There was 2 little outro sequences, and these outro sequences were, they actually gave me the confidence of, like, I want a sequel to this. If I'm remembering correctly, in the first outro sequence, they show you kind of a short snippet of older Sam being in the prison, wherever he's in, during that part of his life. And, they don't, show his face, but they kind of tell the story through these postcards that Sam is sending Nate, and he's writing one back to Nate, and that's one of the send-off scenes. And I thought, wow, that was, Nate, Sam was never a part of the story before 4, and now they have 4 Lost Legacy and this movie all to include this new character through Nate's story. It really ties things together in a way that I would not have anticipated, and I'm really glad that happened. And then the second final scene, which I thought was awesome, starts off with Nate basically wearing the similar attire that he's wearing in the Columbia scenes in early Uncharted 3, you also get to see Mark Wahlberg, Sully, with the iconic mustache, which he did not have at any other part during the movie other than this final sequence, kind of showing him what might happen in the future. Nate is having this kind of typical bar sequence versus this criminal, where they're discussing and there's guns pointed back and forth, right? But Nate actually name drops Roman from Uncharted 1, and I'm like, what a great way to kind of just a name. That's all you needed to do, to just place this moment somewhere in the chronology, and it works. You know, it only adds to the story. I felt like Tom Holland was actually really good. The only thing I wish I could change was his voice. Same with Mark Wahlberg too. I guess all you can really do is just keep practicing, right? Keep training, right? For a better performance. Yeah. Gosh, there's probably more that I want to say, but that's all that comes to mind. I think that you should see this movie while you can. While it's still in theaters. It'll eventually be to more platforms, but if you don't see the movie, why not just play the games? I still feel like all the games are obviously superior. We wouldn't have the movie without the games, but I guess that's all. Thank you for listening, guys, and hopefully there's more of this in the future. Have a nice night.